Aloha, buenas noches, and good evening. My name is Sally Jacques, and on behalf of the Foundation for a Compassionate Society, I would like to welcome all of you here tonight. The Foundation for a Compassionate Society is a non-profit organization led by women, committed to peace and social change through a variety of local, state, national, and international projects. Words cannot express the excitement, pride, joy, and honor the organizing committee feels at bringing together this amazing group of people, the speakers, and you, the audience, who are all acting in history. That helps me breathe. The speakers tonight are pioneers committed to the issues that move them. They do so in the face of a national backlash against women, and sometimes under threat to their personal safety. Their legacy and courage affect all of our lives. The purpose for gathering is not to develop a homogenized feminist position, but rather to expand feminist discourse. Before it grows a leaf, a tree sends out an energy matrix. The tree knows exactly what the leaf will look like, even before it starts to grow. The inspiration, motivation, and greatest wish for this evening is to provide a forum for the kinds of issues and perspectives that are not represented fully in the media. This forum, coupled with the resource each of us presents in our collective intelligence, passion, and commitment to advance the struggle for peace and liberation for all peoples, can then move forward the process of clarification of our vision. This vision, by definition, must be multifaceted and informed by all of our various experiences. We are all trees developing our energy matrices, envisioning our lives as we wish them to be. As we put ourselves in the center of our powerful lives, we affect change all around us to the benefit of everyone and every living thing on the planet. So thank you for being here. And now I would like to introduce Lourdes Perez, a jewel Austin inherited from the nation of Puerto Rico. In November, when Lourdes opened for Mercedes Sosa's, she brought the house down with her own passion and commitment to liberation struggles. Lourdes' greatest tool is her voice. Welcome.
Good evening. We are overcome by your presence, your struggle, your commitment, your importance, and your history. We don't forget, people don't forget. I'm honored to be here. Thank you for opening the path, the ways, new opportunities and windows for us. You're warriors. You are the people that will remain, and we will be here with you to tell the story, like Raul Salinas says. Tonight I want to do a song that I wrote, inspired by the works of the great Chicana poet, writer, Gloria Ansaldúa, who was visiting here last couple of weeks, defining, reshaping who we are. The song talks about the fact that they sold you, they sold me, pain, this pain will pass. The pond that is your verse will remain. The baggage that we carry will fall again and again. Another skin that we leave to the wind, and it will fly. Para Gloria Ansaldúa y ustedes todas. Te vendieron, me vendieron, el dolor es pasajero, manantiales de tu verso quedarán. El bagaje que aquí llevo se desprenderá de nuevo, otra piel que dejó al viento y volará. Te vendieron, me vendieron, el dolor es pasajero, manantiales de tus versos quedarán. El bagaje que aquí llevo se desprenderá de nuevo, otra piel que dejó al viento y volará. Te vendieron, me vendieron, el dolor es pasajero, manantiales de tus versos quedarán. El bagaje que aquí llevo se desprenderá de nuevo, otra piel que dejó al viento y volará. Historia escrita en sangre, sangre color de miel, traición, desierto, hambre, amargura de hiel. Te vendieron, me vendieron, el dolor es pasajero, manantiales de tus versos quedarán. El bagaje que aquí llevo se desprenderá de nuevo, otra piel que dejó al viento y volará. El velo de silencio cantando morderé, cambiando mis adentros, nueva lengua tendré. Te vendieron, me vendieron, el dolor es pasajero, manantiales de tus versos quedarán. El bagaje que aquí llevo se desprenderá de nuevo, otra piel que dejó el viento y volará. Te vendieron, me vendieron, el dolor es pasajero, manantiales de tus versos quedarán. El bagaje que aquí llevo se desprenderá de nuevo, otra piel que dejó el viento y volará. Los puntos cardinales y llevo bajo mi piel brazos que abarcan mundo, nuevas razas seré. Me vendieron, te vendieron, el dolor es pasajero, manantiales de tus versos quedarán. El bagaje que aquí llevo se desprenderá de nuevo, otra piel que dejó el viento y volará. Te vendieron, me vendieron, el dolor es pasajero, manantiales de tus versos quedarán. El bagaje que aquí llevo se desprenderá de nuevo, otra piel que dejó al viento y volará.
Are we on? My next introduction is the person that conceived this evening and is the founder of the foundation, Genevieve Vaughan. And I really want to begin my introduction by expressing my honor and love at having had the opportunity to work with the foundation. It really is a unique experience. Genevieve provides a place to unleash intelligence and for us to initiate actions and to use our voices willfully, many times with emotions, humor, art, and spirit. it is with great pleasure that I introduce Genevieve Vaughan. Thank you.
It's really wonderful to see you all here, and wonderful that the speakers came, and this whole event is really a great thing. In celebration of Mother's Day, let me say that we need to invent or find within ourselves a mother-based economic system that is based on caring for needs instead of on stimulating greed. I believe that women are socialized into caring, and therefore that we already have an alternative value system within ourselves, and many men also do. And the reason I created the Foundation for a Compassionate Society is in an attempt to try to put those values into reality. We're not a society of particularly compassionate people, but we are trying to make the society itself compassionate. This has been hard for all of us to do because right-wing messages and interpretations are broadcast to us from all sides, discouraging us from taking the initiative. Yet, most people know in our hearts that something is terribly wrong, and we welcome the possibility of contributing to social change. Working together in the Foundation has allowed a diverse group of women to support each other for a vision of a better world. I want to welcome our keynote speakers. I am so glad that these almost mythological women have come to share their thinking with us. I hope we will be inspired by them to think deeply and to act courageously, as all of them have done in their different ways. The staff members of the Foundation have done an excellent job in pulling this conference together. All of them do wonderful work in their various projects. I would like to ask the Foundation staff to stand so that you can applaud them, and to give a special thanks to the women who worked on this event. So Foundation staff, stand up please, wherever you are around you. The women who worked on this event particularly are Pat Cuney, Sally Jacques, Suze Kemper, Maria Limon, Sue McNichols, Patty Salas, Erin Rogers, Anna Cisnet. So a special hand to all of them. And Frida Worden and Beth Wisterich are in charge of the audio and video components. I would also like to thank the volunteers for their important help during the preparation and tonight. And thank you all for coming. My hope is that this evening will stimulate a wide-scale discussion about values, which will liberate all of us from the stereotypical thinking and ideological control of the right wing. For many years, I have been working on a theory of value. Even economists do not know what value is, and yet it influences our lives every day. So when the right wing started talking about family values, I knew I wanted to bring women together to discuss our common take on them. I believe feminists have the first collective philosophy, and that we are putting it together from all our different points of view. By uniting with each other across all the boundaries patriarchy creates, we can finally step back from the brink of human and planetary disaster. We need to create widespread social change. We think too much within our own system and not outside of it. The personal and the political are one, But taking personal power without taking political power leaves the system unscathed and allows it to adapt superficially without creating those large-scale systemic changes which are necessary for the survival of the planet. For example, as Rosalie Bertell says, we may stop using underarm deodorant, but if we do not stop the Air Force jet flights, the hole in the ozone will continue to grow because the jets are many times more damaging than all the spray cans on Earth. Our government keeps us ignorant of the damage done by the Air Force jets, and we mistakenly believe that by changing only our individual lives, we are making the difference. We have to liberate ourselves from our ignorance and take our power to make the changes in a system which is disempowering our hearts and creating a context of scarcity which makes caring impractical and even self-sacrificial. Taking political power without recognizing women's values, our values, as specifically different, also leaves the system unscathed. Margaret Thatcher is the example that is usually given for this kind of success. Our capitalist system espouses the values of hierarchy and competition, which are usually considered the values of patriarchy. Individualism, when is seen as the philosophy of every man for himself, is also a position of capitalism. In other words, patriarchal capitalism has the ego-oriented values that feminists oppose in the individual men in our lives. Behind the mask of a fair and free market, in the big picture, the system itself has a perpetrator's face. Patriarchy is a collective psychosis that functions on many different levels, like a fractal self-similar image. It hurts men and women and creates dominant classes and races. In the big picture, the countries of the North practice the patriarchal family values of domination and submission on the countries of the South, making those of us in the so-called first world the accomplices of our country's policies, whether or not we reap the benefits directly. There is no improvement in our individual situations as feminists in the first world that can change our belonging to this perpetrator society. We have to take our efforts and energies, our alternative values outside of our homes and private lives into the arena in which large-scale policies are decided. The patriarchal values only recreate the problems again and again at different levels. Structurally, my own position as a wealthy woman who has many advantages and disadvantages, some disadvantages, is similar to the position of everyone in the U.S. with regard to third world countries. Unless I, or unless all of us, think and act beyond the boundaries of the privileged categories of class or race or nation or sex, we are parts of the perpetrator system, causing the suffering of millions of people and the devastation of the planet. We have to pose the problem to ourselves and act to change this system from within. And there is no way out of it, no space on the planet where we can be inactive and innocent. I believe that the macho ego, whether it belongs to an individual or to a nation, is a social product, which is an aberration, not the norm, and that the values of care, which are still being practiced mostly by women in this society, are the normal way of behaving for all. The values of care are not incorporated into the social structures. Look, for example, at aid to third world countries, which is said to be a gift, but is actually a hidden exchange. This travesty disqualifies caring and makes it seem unrealistic. Reality itself is made to be patriarchal. Values motivate systems. Women's values could motivate a completely different kind of system from the one we have now. The right-wing patriarchal values will never solve the problems they and their system have created. We have to think and act together quickly to create a new system and a new reality now. Thank you.
Thanks, Jen. Isn't this exciting? Pretty historical, eh? I'm Marsha Gomez, a mother and one of the co-founding mothers and board members of the Indigenous Women's Network, director of Alma de Mujer Center for Social Change, which has been a project of the Foundation for a Compassionate Society for the past 8 years, and most recently has been transferred and made a gift to by Genevieve to the Indigenous Women's Network. It is my honor tonight to introduce to you one of my heroes, comadres, and sister board members of the Indigenous Women's Network. Mililani Trask is Kiaina of her nation. Kiaina is head of the state of Kahalui, which is the sovereign native Hawaiian nation, which has a citizenry of approximately or over 25,000. Which is a large constituency when you consider that approximately 14% of the population of the Hawaiian Islands is Native Hawaiian. Attorney at law, Mililani has dedicated her skills and her practice, literally her heart, body, and soul, to the self-determination of her people and the protection of the land base there. She has litigated endlessly, tirelessly, head on with corporate, multinational, transnational adversaries. She's protected sacred sites, have won back homelands for her people, and her work for her people has led her into the international arena for over the decade I have known her, where she has served major leadership roles with Indigenous and people of color initiatives and commissions. Most recently with the Indigenous Peace Initiative with Rigoberta Menchú, and also the UNPO, the Unrecognized Nations and Peoples Organizations that was founded by the Dalai Lama in 1991. She's just returned from DC yesterday, where she sits on a board with the Environmental and Economic Justice Globalization think tank. It is with utmost respect and honor to introduce Mililani Trask.
Aloha, my sisters. I had wanted to begin first by acknowledging the Creator and thanking the Creator for bringing us all here together safely and blessing our endeavors. And also I had wanted to begin by thanking my sister and friend, Genevieve Vaughan, and those who have worked so many months to bring this gathering together. It's a great honor and pleasure for me to be here to speak as a member of this most distinguished panel in behalf of the nation of Kalahui, Hawaii, as a member of the Indigenous Women's Network, an ambassador for the Indigenous Initiative for Peace, and our sister Rigoberta Menchú, and also on behalf of the Unrepresented Nations and Peoples Organizations founded in 1991 by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, for those nations who are not recognized or given a seat in the United Nations. Several months ago, I was busy at my desk and I got a call, and at the time I wasn't taking any calls. But my secretary came in and said, you know, Mililani, there's somebody on the phone, I know you want to speak with her, it's Genevieve Vaughan. I told her, sure, I always have the time for Jen. And I got on the phone and she said, Mililani, we're looking to put together something that's going to be a watershed event for women's thought, for the women's agenda in the coming decade. It will be in Austin, Texas. And she told me what her goals were and why the Foundation for Compassionate Society had committed itself to this great undertaking. And she honored me and invited me to come. And I told her, well, of course, Jen, I will be there. And then I promptly forgot about it for several weeks. Then a few weeks later, about 4 or 5 weeks later, Renee came back in the office and she said, here are the faxes that have come for the speaking engagement that you have confirmed to participate in for feminist family values. And I told her, Renee, that's a mistake because I would never agree to speak at a gathering on feminist family values. She gave me the papers and, I looked at it and I thought to myself, I didn't really read through it. And I thought, well, this could mean two things. It means feminists are coming together to talk about family values, the values that they teach to their children, their daughters, their sons, the values that they try to move in their families with their husbands. Or it could mean that the feminist family is coming together to talk about their values as feminists. In either case, I knew I wasn't supposed to be speaking at the engagement because I don't have husband. I never did have husband. I don't have children that I've given birth to. So in the dominant society sense, I don't have a nuclear family. The other thing is that I'm not a feminist. I've never considered myself to be a feminist. I've always believed that feminists were people who were white women, positions of stature and money and other such things, which clearly I am not. So I looked at the paper and Renee was saying, no, you confirmed this, it's in your calendar. This is what Jen called you about. And I thought that, darn Jen, is she throwing me another curveball? But I took a look at it and I thought to myself, classically in the Jen Vaughan style, she gives us a title that is controversial and in doing so invites us to accept the challenge of change. And so I've come this long distance to address the women's political agenda for the coming decade, to talk about women's empowerment, and to present to you for your consideration and review two things. The first is the Beijing Declaration of the Indigenous Women who gathered in August of 1995 to prepare their own agenda for the coming decade. And the second is to bring forward the challenge that was issued from Beijing, a challenge to expand feminist thought on the issue of gender equity. I think that we are prepared for this debate. I had wanted to begin first by reviewing for you the great product, which I'm so proud of, that came out of the Indigenous Women's Tent in Beijing. Beijing was a great, great undertaking, and it was possibly one of the most important events that I ever attended in my life. It was just a logistical mess. But one of the things that just is so funny to me about the gathering in Beijing, 35,000 women came to Huairou, came to Beijing. That was those of us who made it. 15 to 20,000 women never made it to Beijing because the oppressive government of China would not issue them visas. When we arrived in Beijing, the oppressive government, paternalistic government of China, had girded its loins for thousands of women coming from all over the world to burn their bras. And I'm not joking you. In the taxi cabs in Huairou and Beijing, they had folded up old military blankets so that they could throw it on us when we bared our breasts and burned our bras. And I was laughing with Jen about this, and I was talking with Gloria earlier about this impression that was placed in the minds of these leaders in China, that they were anticipating that women were going to come there and burn their bras. And I thought, I was never really sure that that ever happened. And with the help of Jen and Gloria, I now know the true story. There never was bras burned at the Miss America concert so many years ago because they couldn't get a fire license to light the fire. But somehow, the oppressive, paternalistic government of China had this firmly embedded in their mind. And that was because they had bought hook, line, and sinker The stereotypical image of what feminist movement was that was created by the media, the white male-dominated media back in the 60s. Well, those old Chinese men were in for a surprise. When we came to China, to Beijing, they thought we're coming there to burn our bras. But by the time we left, 12 days later, they realized that we had come there to burn imperialism, transnational corporations, racism, and economic inequity. So we correct the great misunderstanding in the minds of the male-dominated leaders of China. And at the same time, I felt that we struck a blow for what was really women's empowerment. I don't like the tag or the label of feminism. I've always felt that it had certain racial and social economic contexts, as my sister Jen Vaughan has pointed out. But as I criticize this term, and as I challenge you all to stop using this term, and to start speaking in terms of women's empowerment and women's agenda, I do want in the same breath to acknowledge that the negative connotations associated with this term is something that we have all been victimized. It is something that was cultivated by the white male-dominated media of the West. So I want to acknowledge that as we go into this discussion. Many women from all over the world met in Beijing. There were so many events that we really could not participate in everything. It is the great blessing for all of us that the Cordillera women from the Philippines had the foresight and the resources to put together an indigenous women's tent. And there for 12 days, day and night, indigenous women from the world came. And we overcame racial barriers and cultural divisions, economic, how shall I say it, the economic gap, to come together to write a global statement. And that statement has been printed up now in many different languages, in the languages of Asia and also in English. We have it printed here in its entirety in the current edition of the Indigenous Women's Magazine, which is outside on the table that has the banner of the Indigenous women. I had wanted first to touch upon this statement, to invite you all to have the time, take the time to reflect upon what we are saying, because this statement contains the mana'o, the thought of the Indigenous Women's Global Movement. And it begins in a very appropriate way because we gather at this time, it is Mother's Day. And it begins in this way: the earth is our mother. From her we receive our life and our ability to live. It is our responsibility to care for our mother. And in caring for our mother, we care for ourselves. Women, all females, are a manifestation of Mother Earth in human form. We stand in unity behind this 1995 Beijing Declaration of Indigenous Women, which is the fruit of our collective efforts to understand the world and our situation as Indigenous women, to critique the draft platform for action and articulate our demands to the international community, the governments of the world, and the NGOs. The New World Order, which is engineered by those who have abused and raped Mother Earth, colonized, marginalized, and discriminated against us, is being imposed upon us viciously. This is recolonization coming under the name of globalization and trade liberalization. The forces behind this are the rich industrialized nation states, their transnational corporations, financial institutions which they control, like the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Trade Organizations. They will cooperate and compete among themselves to the last frontiers of the Earth's natural resources located on our traditional lands. That is the beginning statement of the Indigenous Women's Global Declaration that issued from Beijing. We don't have the time tonight to look at it in detail, but I do want to touch upon some of the most important parts of this declaration. And in doing so, I had wanted to begin by sharing with you a little bit. I am Kanaka Maoli. I am Native Hawaiian. Hawaii is the northeasternmost part of the archipelago of the Pacific Basin. The Pacific Basin is the largest region in the world, but no one realizes that. It's not taught in the schools because we are island peoples. And what dominates our education in the West is continental thinking. Many people don't know that Hawaii was an independent nation up until 1893. We are considered to be the only indigenous nation in the world that was able to come abreast of more enlightened Western colonized nations. When we were allegedly discovered by Captain James Cook, the imperializing Brit who sailed in from Europe, he declared that he discovered Hawaii for the Europeans, for the English specifically, landed on our shores, and there were 1 million people living in a matrilineal society. And he promptly declared that we belonged to Britain. That sphere of influence was terminated by the introduction of American sugar planters and their own economic plan. And so it was in 1893 that marine gunboats of the United States of America sailed into our harbor, disbanded their machineries and implementations of death and destruction, the cannon and the musket, and overthrew our queen. At the time of our overthrow, we had 22 international covenants and conventions in place of friendship and recognition with all of the enlightened Western nations of the world. We had treaties of friendship and peace with France and Britain, Germany, Switzerland, Imperial Japan, and others. Several treaties with the United States of America. But we see now historically the emptiness of those words. And so we were colonized and imperialized. In 1893, our kingdom overthrown, and a puppet government installed for 5 years, run by a man named Stanford B. Dole. You may not know him, but I'm sure you have all, in one way or another, consumed his product. You do so when you eat Dole pineapple. That was the man who the President of the United States put in power over our independent nation. When Cook sailed in, there were 1 million Kanaka Maoli. A generation and a half later, the time of the overthrow, there were 39,000 of us remaining. Today we are 200,000 Kanaka Maoli. You see that our population is increasing because we love each other. There is a saying in the Hawaiian culture that you can marry whoever you wish, but mate with your own kind. In this way, we generate our numbers. We had a matrilineal society, and by that I mean not that men were marginalized or oppressed, but in matrilineal societies such as ours, women played a central role not only in governing, in land tenure, but also in the spiritual arena. In matrilineal societies such as Hawaii, it is my brothers who would teach my sons the ways of fishing and gathering and hunting. In matrilineal societies, women are not marginalized, nor are we given easy out in difficult times. For instance, in time of war, in most societies, the women took the children and the elders and fled to the mountains. But in Hawaii, in time of war, the elders took the children to the mountains, and the women took their spears to the battlefield with the men. Excuse me, but I was mad. When we gathered in Beijing, it was good to see that there were representatives from matrilineal societies, because there are very few that remain, and it is my estimation that most of them now are indigenous cultures. When we took a look at the global agenda, and we struggled with it day and night for about 12 days, we divided our statement into 6 different areas. And the first was a critique of the Beijing Platform of Action. I don't want to diminish the work that the United Nations accomplished in Beijing. I want to say that many of the things in the Beijing Platform of Action adopted by the United Nations were very important. But there were significant deficiencies and omissions. For one thing, the Beijing Platform was not critical of and did not analyze what is now known as the New World Order. It did not take a look at the impact of transnational corporations and their international financiers. It did not consider the root causes of poverty among women. It did not, with any integrity, address the economic basis for the poverty of women globally, because it could not, because they had blinded their eyes to the agenda of American and European transnational corporations and their international financiers. This is why addressing and analyzing the New World Order, what is now known as globalization, the expansion of transnationals, and their voracious appetite for consuming the natural and human resources of the world, this is why this is the primary issue on the agenda of the global indigenous women's community. Because we comprise the majority of women of the world. The majority of women of the world are women of color and indigenous women, and I'm going to get to that distinction shortly. We are the ones who live under poverty. We are the ones who suffer at the hands of militarism and from violence in all of its forms. And we suffer at a greater rate than others. 70% of those who live in the world today, who live in tragic situation of poverty, are women. And that is not a mistake. Women are viewed by transnational corporations as a cheap labor source, not as human beings, but as a cheap labor source. And we need to understand this. We need to confront this. We need to enunciate this. We need to stand up to this pattern of globalization and to realize, when we see it with our woman's eye, that this is a manifestation of paternalism, of colonization and imperialism. Globalization and the New World Order is the natural consequence of capitalist, paternalist society. We need to see that. We need to name it. We need to call it by its rightful name. We need to see that poverty is the result of this and not the result of anything else. We need to clear the agenda and straighten our mind on this. One of the things that we pointed out in our declaration was militarism, the expansion of militarism. Militarism is a tool of oppression, and it's a tool that is used against women. And there is a relationship that we see in the global arena with our indigenous eyes between militarism and rape and sexual slavery, sexual trafficking of indigenous women. Military regimes have used rape as a mechanism to subvert indigenous cultures. Rape is not just something that occurs because of crime in the street in the United States of America. We need to understand that rape is a vehicle of militarism. And we need to also understand and appreciate the relationship between militarism and the dramatic increase in the incidence of AIDS and HIV, which we are also seeing globally in indigenous communities. Because military forces, whether Americans over in Okinawa or anywhere else in the world, military forces are generally males, and their need to satisfy their sexual drive is indiscriminate. And as a result of it, we need to address how it impacts the spread of AIDS and HIV. Many people are concerned with addressing AIDS and HIV from a health context, but it seems to me that nobody really wants to address with any integrity the relationship between militarism and the spread of AIDS globally, and we have got to address this issue if we are going to get on top of this AIDS-HIV epidemic. We need to do this. Because of these failures in the program of action that issued from the United Nations, the Indigenous Women's Global Declaration decided to set forth their own platform of demands, and these we divided into 5 distinct areas: recognizing and respecting our rights to self-determination. As women, we are not just the mothers of children, we are also the mothers of nations. We need to enunciate our agenda in terms of our right to self-determination. And that political right is defined in the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights in this way: the right of self-determination is the right of all peoples, not just men, but all peoples, to determine their political status, and by virtue of this right, to structure our own political futures, to determine, to define how we wish to develop our economies, how we wish to utilize our lands, how we wish to create economic programs in our community, and structure healthcare programs. This is the right of self-determination. It is political, civil, social, and economic. It is an international human right, and it is time that we enunciate our right as women in terms of international legal standards that for too long have only been applied to white males from the dominant society. We also addressed and requested and demanded that the nations of the world recognize and respect our right to our territories and lands, natural resources, our right for self-development, education, and health, in ways that are culturally appropriate to our peoples, because we are vitally concerned with developing community-based economic programs, with addressing critical health needs. We acknowledge and we understand as women from indigenous societies that these programs must be culturally appropriate. You cannot take health programs developed in New York down to Haiti, impose it on the community, and then scratch your head and wonder later why the program was a failure. If you're going to be addressing the health needs of the women from South Africa or the women from the Philippines, you need to acknowledge their cultures and put it in an appropriate cultural context so that it will be effective, and not develop it in London or Chicago or some other place, bring it to the Pacific Basin and impose it upon women who are Fijian, Tongan, and Hawaiian. We cannot integrate in that way. A third area that we took a look at was environmental toxicity, and the other side of that ugly little coin, which is known as environmental racism. The bad habit the transnational and G7 nations have of consuming our resources, creating toxic byproducts, and then bringing it over to the lands of indigenous peoples. You know, one of the reasons why the women of Hawaii have the highest rate of breast cancer in the world is because in Hawaii, for years, there was toxic dumping of DDT. Long after America outlawed the use of DDT on the continent, it was prohibited in the continental United States. You wonder why? That was to make sure that American companies would have an open market to bring it out to Cuba, the Philippines, and Hawaii and dump it on our lands. And so now it is in our water system. You would think that the highest rate of breast cancer would be somewhere else in the third world, but it is not. It is in Hawaii. Toxic dumping, mining of uranium, other such demonic practices have a necessary consequence, and that is environmental racism. Where are the toxic dumps? Where are the nuclear rods being stored while all on American Indian land? In the communities of black people and Spanish-speaking American. Why is this the case? There is a new term we need to learn. It is environmental racism. It is one facet of racism. A third area that we considered and debated and addressed in Beijing had to do with our rights to cultural and intellectual property and our rights to control the biological diversity of our territories. The Creator has given us a great blessing, the diversity of the earth, the diversity of all of the life forms of the earth. This is our cultural heritage. All indigenous women know that we're placed here to be guardians of the sacred earth, our mother. We are her daughters. That is our calling. That is our place. We know this from the time of our birth and even before. In our mother's womb, we are indigenous. When we are born, that is when we are called American. Nationality is only assigned based on the geographics where you are born, but before that time, in your mother's womb, you are indigenous women. And now American pharmaceuticals and those from Europe have embarked upon the copywriting of life forms. They are taking leaves on trees. They are taking animals. They are registering them. They are saying, we own this. And because we as a pharmaceutical own this leaf, you cannot use it for healing. You cannot make medicine from it. You cannot cure cancer with it unless you pay us. The Biodiversity Convention was passed in Rio. Many of us wept at that time. They said that we should celebrate because now there were finally going to be international laws and rules in place to protect the rights of indigenous peoples, to ensure that we would benefit from the great wealth of biodiversity given to us by the Creator, our mother. But I was one of those who wept because life forms shouldn't be owned by American pharmaceuticals. There's something that is demonic about that. And if you think that this is the most outrageous and insidious thing you have ever heard, let me tell you that it is only the first step. Because American pharmaceuticals and the scientific communities, their supporters at the United Nations, have also determined that within the next 50 to 100 years, there will be certain cultures of indigenous peoples that will pass away as a result of their own ethnocidal and genocidal practices. 700 indigenous cultures are slated for extinction in the coming 100 years. And these companies, these pharmaceuticals, are very worried because now they realize that encoded in our genetic material are traits that they do not have in the dominant society. And so they have set aside, they have created a new program. It is called the Human Genome Project. The Human Genome Project is gathering the hair, skin, and blood of the 700 indigenous cultures of the world who are set for extinction so that they can put these genetic materials in the deep freeze. They want to get the blood and the hair of the Eskimos because they can survive very, very extreme low temperatures. And they can be healthy and strong without eating vegetables. This would be a great, great, powerful factor for anyone's military if they had this trait. So before the Eskimos vanish, we better get their blood and hair. Do you know who's on the list? Are you on the list? Indigenous peoples in the Pacific Basin are there. We're on the list. indigenous peoples in Central and South America, Africa, Asia. Better check the list. Better find out about the Human Genome Project. Better join your indigenous sisters in stopping this little diabolical plan. As I told them in Beijing, I went to see the World Health Organization. The women there were so outraged. We just had a little march over to the World Health Organization and shut down the funding plan for the Human Genome Project. We did it right there. I told them, gentlemen, you may be surprised to learn that your plan for genocide of my people will not work. That's what you thought when you sent the military gunboats in 1893. You got us down to close to extinction, 39,000, but in the last 100 or so years, our numbers are coming back up, and we don't intend to let them dip any further.